made a lot of moves in your life from your career. You've moved country from the States, and you've also tried some other kind of wacky things. You've experimented a lot. Maybe just give people a bit of context. How did you end up in Prague today? The quick synopsis.
Quick version. So I was working as a construction worker. I was in the laborers union back in the US. I did that for about 7 years. I wasn't very fulfilled in that job. I did a little bit of traveling and kind of got the idea that maybe I'd like to move to another country. I personally don't have any skills or qualifications that would, make me a commodity to most companies, but I do speak English relatively well. So I have the ability to teach that here in Prague. That's why I'm here.
And yeah, cool. How did you find construction? Was it something you enjoyed, or
As a career, I'm a third generation construction worker. My father did it, my grandfather did it, my stepmother, my brother. So, it's a career that can provide a life for a family, but like I said, I wasn't very fulfilled. I didn't feel like I was accomplishing anything. And I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not talking about any friends that I made while I was working construction, but I just felt like I could do something better. I felt like I was equipped to do something, at least that I enjoyed more. I'm not saying one thing's better than another, but you know what I mean.
yeah, no, of course. I completely understand. So maybe you felt a bit stuck in that career. It wasn't for you. How did you have the awareness to realize that there was other opportunities, or why didn't you kind of have the mindset of just kind of suck it up and get on with things?
And I had that mindset for like 5 years. I knew pretty soon getting in that it wasn't for me, but I did have that mindset for a while. But it's nice that you mentioned the word stuck. Like, I know a lot of people feel this way, and my background, even before I got into construction, I wasn't really doing the right thing. I was into drugs and stuff like that, so I was definitely stuck in more than one way. And it wasn't easy getting out of that. It took time and a lot of mental effort. Uh, yeah, eventually I just finally, little by little, step by step, just kind of got the courage, I guess, because I guess that's what it takes, courage
Yeah.
to move to another country. Finally worked up the courage, and there was a catalyst that really sparked action to leave home and move out abroad. So I guess it's a roundabout answer to the question, but it took time. It took time and a lot of personal work.
Gotcha. And was there like a correlation between you moving career and kind of not and giving up doing drugs or using drugs, or was that which came first? Was it, did you kind of stop, realize, okay, I need to stop kind of taking drugs every weekend or doing that, and then you decided to
Yeah,
change
for
career,
sure.
or was it vice versa?
No, it was I stopped doing drugs first. I wasn't able to
Yeah.
make any progress or any changes in my life unless I stopped doing that first. As you said, for me, it wasn't just the weekends, it was a daily thing. So I had to do that first. And back home, I was completely sober for, back home, it was a little over 3 years, and then whatever, it was 4 years total. So I had to really be fully sober for some time before I was able to kind of put my life together and decide what I wanted to do.
Yeah, cool. And fair play for doing that. Or it's definitely, I can imagine it wouldn't be an easy thing to do.
Well,
And
it,
you're obviously unhappy. Not continue, Steph, please.
yeah, it certainly wasn't easy. I got into drugs at a young age. The time where I put 4 years together wasn't my first attempt at getting sober. I'd failed many times before that. So it definitely was not an easy thing to do. However, it's possible. My story with drugs and sobriety, it's not exactly the normal one or the one that you hear all the time, but it's my story. It works for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, I appreciate you saying that as well, Steph. I know a lot of people wouldn't be comfortable disclosing kind of personal things like that. So yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
definitely your story. Yeah.
yeah, it's part of who I am. It's part of what shaped me, and it's
Hmm.
honestly part of what got me to where I am today. I'm pretty happy in my life now, and I think, you know, not to be too poetic, but I kind of had to go down a dark path in order to get to where I am today. Who knows, if I had done the the generic, high school, college, get a job, retirement fund, and all that stuff, maybe I wouldn't be where I am today. So, I mean, I could guarantee I wouldn't be where I am.
No, I agree 100%. I think often the times where I've been happiest, they've often came after a time of like feeling like isolated or alone. I think you almost when you like kind of let go and like hit the bottom or like hit like a really low point and you're like, wow, I feel so depressed. That's when you have to change, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I can relate to that 100%. Yeah. Yeah, in Ireland there's like a huge like party drug culture, like house parties, MDMA, and loads of people do it in university. I did it as well, and looking back, I do regret some of it. To be honest, I kind of regret most of it. Like I did meet some nice friends, but I can definitely relate to like feeling stuck and how it kind of takes over your life and stuff. And how did you find like did you find it hard to move away from that kind of scene or that like social group? Because for me, a big thing was like just the social aspect of it. I don't think I was ever addicted to drugs like physically. It was more so like the people I was around and kind of I wanted to fit in and stuff.
Sure, sure. I mean, for me, like I was doing drugs for about 10 years, so initially it started out, I had some friends, we would all get high together and then whatever, but the longer you do it, you kind of just want to be isolated, you kind of want to be alone. But it's still like it's a whole lifestyle, going to get the drugs, if you got to try to hustle up some money some way to in order to afford that, like it's a whole lifestyle. And as I mentioned, it wasn't my first time trying to get sober. The previous times, that was something that was very difficult, was like getting away from that lifestyle, and I thought I'd be bored, what am I going to do or whatever. So it was very difficult for me. But then, this last time, honestly, I don't know if it was an internal thing or something, but getting sober this past time was actually very easy for some reason. I don't know why. Like, I, you mentioned the rock bottom and that feeling of desperation. Like, I had just had enough, and I didn't want to live my life like that anymore. As I said before, I felt like I was capable of doing something better with my life. And I guess that finally caught up with me, and I had just had enough. So, like, getting sober and staying sober wasn't really difficult for 4 years.
And you said like enough was enough. So what was there previous times where you kind of said, oh, maybe I should stop, but then you kind of gave in? Could you compare it to other like were you kind of like was there previous occasions where you were aware that you probably should have stopped doing drugs and got your life together, but you didn't? Was it easier
Well,
to stop this time than other times?
for sure. I mean, there was, I think most
Yeah,
addicts that are actively using know just about every day that like they should try to get their life together and that they shouldn't be doing what they are doing. But the interesting thing for me was that my first handful of attempts at sobriety were kind of forced upon me, whether it was by, the court or my parents, or like I just didn't have any money and I didn't have any hustle left in me. So I figured I might as well try to get sober, go into a treatment center or something like that. But this last time, actually, if I wanted to, like I could have kept using. I could have kept getting high. I had money. I could have woke up the next day, got high again, but just woke up in the morning. It was actually Easter Sunday, which might be symbolic, and especially since Easter just passed, I look at that as a kind of a symbolism right there. But I had just had enough, and I made the decision like I'm done with this. I wanna go down a different path.
I know people are addicted for different reasons, or people have addiction for different reasons. But for you, was it like a coping mechanism, or what do you think the root cause was?
Consciously, for me, I can't say exactly what it was. I mean, I did lose my mother at a young age. I was 14. I was just going into high school. I didn't immediately start doing like hard drugs right after that, but somewhere down the line, I'm sure that played a part. But again, like consciously, I wasn't like, oh, I need to numb the pain, and, like keep chasing the high for that
Yeah,
reason. Honestly, it started just as a good time. Like it started as a good time. Like we're gonna take some pills or whatever, and smoke some weed, whatever it was. Like it just started as a good time, like a social thing. And I really liked it. Like I liked changing my consciousness. I liked being high. I mean, that's you go to any rehab facility and they'll tell you that's not a reason for using, but I don't know. That's what it felt like.
yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that as well. I know also you made another interesting point last time we spoke, Sev, and you said like you don't like the label as an addict. You said when you were like labeled as an addict, it was almost like a get out of jail free card. I thought that was a different perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, that kind of ties into like the mental health epidemic that we're seeing all over like the Western world, at least now, like mental health awareness and all of these things. And it leads to like, probably overdiagnosis of some of these problems. But anyway, to tackle your question, uh, I think when you label yourself as something like that, whether it's an addict, whether it's, depression, anxiety, bipolar, a lot of these things, you're kind of giving yourself, like you said, a get out of jail free card. Like, this behavior isn't my fault. It's not my responsibility because I'm this, because I'm an addict, right? That wasn't me sneaking into my parents' room to steal money from them. That was my addiction, right? My disease. So in a way, it kind of alleviates you of some personal responsibility for your actions. Now, granted, there is something to be said for it, but I think more often than not, it's kind of used as a crutch.
It's kind of putting on your conservative hat, really. But I think that definitely has its place. So yeah, it's definitely a valid point. So you kind of had that kind of, yeah, you had that path in life, and then you said you went traveling. You said that was also kind of that was a change for you. Went bikepacking. What was the main thing that happened there? Or like, what could you say? What did you gain from that experience?
So I think I just really widened my perspective, As an American, I can only speak from my experience there. I don't know if other countries face the same type of propaganda. Right? But when you hear about like other parts of the world, they make it seem like it's dangerous or it's worse than it is at home. Don't go there, you're gonna get kidnapped or something. So I mean, I went to like Central and South America, and people are mostly the same. If anything, my experience down there, people were generally nicer than they were in the United States, like more welcoming. I'm sure there's dangerous parts of the world everywhere. It doesn't make, you can't label a whole country as something like that. So my experience traveling, I got to meet people not only from the countries that I went, but also from around the world. Again, you learn that you have more in common than there are differences. And yeah, I don't know, it just kind of widen my world. It's like when you're playing a video game and like half the map is still, you haven't unlocked it yet and it's gray, right? And then you finally go there, you see it, and it's like you got all this color and everything. Like my internal map grew from that experience.
It does broaden your horizon so much. I was bikepacking last year. I think it's so funny coming back to my job at the moment and coming back to like my previous what I was doing beforehand, my previous life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just gives you such a fresh perspective on like what you're doing and why you're doing it, and yeah, it's great that way. I definitely recommend it to anyone who wants, who feels a bit stuck, or I definitely felt a bit stuck this time last year.
Absolutely. Would definitely recommend it. And you mentioned like going back home or something like that. And and this is not a dig at anybody, but it kind of makes you realize how either uninformed or misinformed a lot of people are about reality. You hear a lot of like opinions and things about other parts of the world from people who have never been there, and they're just completely wrong, And I think being informed is like a good way to be a well-rounded human being. So the more you get out there and travel, the more informed you're going to be about these things. And, you don't sound like an idiot to somebody that knows what they're talking about.
Did you travel solo?
Did.
Or did you?
Went off on my own. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really the plan from the get-go. There was nothing like, oh, a few of my buddies and I were going to get together. We're going to go backpacking. Like that wasn't even a thought where I grew up. Like nobody that I was friends with back in high school, like nobody was doing this. It was a completely, granted, I didn't do that until about 10 years, 5, 6 years since I graduated high school. But like people where I was from wasn't doing this stuff. Like it was a completely novel idea to them.
So no one in your social group went backpacking. You were like the crazy guy who took off with his backpack.
Yeah, they're just like, dude, what's Sevi doing? He's like going off into the jungle. Like, what are we doing? Yeah.
And were you nervous going on your own? Were you apprehensive, or did that kind of come naturally too?
No, I wasn't nervous at all, honestly, because where I was at in my life when, you're like, oh, crazy Sev going off to travel the world or whatever. That's really what I was at the time. Um, we mentioned like, I'll give you a little background. I think it might be valid here. So, you know, we were talking earlier about how I had made a few attempts at being sober in the past. Well, during one of those attempts, I did stay away from like harder drugs for a while, but I was getting a little crazy with the psychedelics. All right. So I was doing a lot of psychedelics, acid, mushrooms, and honestly, that got me on a spiritual path. I mean, listen, I'm just going to be completely honest. Like, I went to Catholic schools my whole life growing up. You're Irish. I'm sure you know what that's all about. Like, went to Catholic schools my whole life, but was never really a religious person. Kind of like pushed God to the side, wasn't a believer in anything like that. I could give you 20 different reasons why your religion's wrong or why you shouldn't believe in religion at all. But once I became like a pretty heavy psychedelic user for a short period of time, my mind kind of opened up to these things, and it set me on the spiritual path, which eventually led me to go to Costa Rica, where initially that was part of my spiritual journey. It didn't turn into that once I got there, but that's how it started. So I was completely at peace when I went there. I had all the confidence in the world that that was exactly where I was supposed to be at that moment, and that any obstacle that I face, I would find a solution for. I was completely confident.
So you kind of feel like the universe was guiding you in that sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like when you tell someone you're like, some people would say like, okay, if you're spiritual, like I listen to like a lot of like spiritual. I've read a lot of spiritual books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I listen to like Ram Dass and those guys. I do like meditations, and my friends would joke saying like, oh yeah, John's so spiritual. But like, if someone asked me like, if you are spiritual, what's that even mean? Like it kind of sounds almost cringy. But like, if you say you're spiritual, like, what does that actually? I know it's a hard question to answer, but I'm just interested. What does it mean that you are spiritual?
It's an amazing question. I don't think anybody knows. Nobody knows the answer to this.
Yeah,
So I guess like just thinking about it off the top of my head, right? Like the theory is, or the concept here is that like every person has a spirit, right? Like it's your soul, whatever you
yeah,
want to call it, something that gives us this like divine spark, whatever you want to call it. So I guess being spiritual and being on a spiritual path would just mean one, that you're conscious of that you're conscious of like some spiritual or emotional being that is oftentimes different from the person you physically present to the world, right? Your inner self, whatever you want to call it. There's a bunch of different names for it. And then I guess like for me, being spiritual is realizing that like I'm in control of that, right? And therefore I am also like anything that goes on in my life is part my responsibility, right? Like any bad situation I've ever found myself in, I made some choice down the line that put myself in that position. So now being spiritual, I'm going to work on that aspect of my behavior. That internal thought process, right? How my actions affect the world around. I think for me, that's like what being spiritual means.
it kind of sounds like you're saying like you're less like you're more aware of your ego, maybe that there's like something else there. Your inner self. You're not gripped by your mind or the thinking self. Well, that's a term I've used before.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
But like
something like that, right? This is one of those
something
topics,
like
one of
that,
those
exactly.
things
Yeah.
that's really difficult to kind of get a definition
Mm,
for. It's like, what's the definition
yeah.
of love? Like, who the hell knows? It's like, what does it mean to be spiritual? I
True.
think it can be different for me, for you, for Ramdas. Like, it's
Yeah.
something like we're dancing around it right now. We can't really pin it
Hmm.
down, but we're dancing around the true definition.
Yeah, and I think like a component or an aspect of spirituality is that like it's something that words can't describe, or as Christianity would say, like the divine. It's something you have to experience. But
Yeah, maybe just not putting all of your attention on the physical world.
yes, And you made another good point there. Actually, it's like love. Like, if what is love? You know, like you can't describe words. So a really strong feeling, but you know, it obviously means something different to that.
Yeah, and we
It's
all
like
have our
symbolic
own
almost.
right. We all have our own like understanding of I know what love means to me. Like I know what I mean when I tell someone I love them. But when they say love me back, if they say that, uh, it might mean something different to them.
Yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, you took psychedelics, and that said that really opened your mind to the whole spiritual realm. Um, did you take too many psychedelics and kind of go off the grid, or
Yep.
how was your? I'm interested in hearing more about your kind of relationship with psychedelics.
So definitely kind of went off the reservation there for a minute. Like I didn't go technically off the grid like that's what I wanted to do. That's why I went to Costa Rica. Didn't, like I said, didn't get there. But I don't know if these two are directly related or it was just like the natural progression of my life. But I when I started taking psychedelics, I also kind of started to like wake up to a lot of other things around me. I'm very hesitant to use the term woke these days because it's been co-opted like to mean something negative or well, back
It's
I'm talking
political,
about. It's a
yeah,
political word now, exactly. But
political
back in
term,
the
yeah.
time that I'm talking about, maybe 2012, something like that, like to be woke, I think was a good thing. It just meant like, oh, maybe the government's lying to us about this. Maybe Social Security isn't everything it's cracked up to be. Maybe the Federal Reserve is like is more of a predator than something that's here to help us, you know? So I started waking up to these different things around the same time I started doing psychedelics. And I kind of went down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, if you will. And that kind of it's a fun rabbit hole to go down. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking it. And I still am definitely on the fence about a lot of different things regarding conspiracies. But it can definitely consume you and it can kind of like, you know, kind of definitely affect the way you operate in the world. And it was doing that for me. Uh Again, like so I guess started getting into the conspiracies same time I'm doing the psychedelics, and then I get to like the ultimate like 2000 and something conspiracy of flat Earth, right? I dive into the flat Earth. I'm
Wow.
reading the flat Earth literature, right? I'm like looking outside. I don't see the curve. I'm flying to Florida. Where's the curve? Um, but it's funny because like I felt like I almost got tricked at the end. Like I found this amazing website that had like all this data compiled. It was like 40 something pages. I finally get to the end. I get to the end of the flat earth theory. And basically like what you find at the end is not like a leprechaun in a pot of gold. You find God at the end of flat earth. And I was like, fuck, dude, I just invested all this time. I was like, I think I'm in the club. Like, I think I have secret knowledge that they're hiding from me. And then at the end, they're like, well, then it must be God. God must have created this. And that kind of like, I still remember I was laying in my bed reading this on my laptop. And like, I get to the end and like, I kind of just like, almost like a dizzy. And I felt like almost like I'm tricked. But then I kind of felt like, shit, maybe they're right. Like, not necessarily just about the flat earth, but I'm back to like just the topic of God and like some sort of something like that. And honestly, when I got to the end and like the answer to flat earth was God, uh really what started me on like this spiritual path, honestly. I had a friend that I had honestly probably
So
met in real life. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I might just hop in there, Sev. So is that like is at the end of with the flat? Is that a flat Earth theory that you find God at the end of flat Earth, or is it saying that once you realize that the Earth is not flat, you find God? Or could you explain? I don't really understand that.
So basically, most of what I got, most of my flat Earth exploration was done from this one
Yeah.
website. So I'll just get into it. Like I had this friend that I maybe met once or twice. We are like from the same area back around Boston. And we were friends on Facebook, and all of a sudden we're like sharing the same type of stuff. Right. So then
Mm.
he sends me a message and he's like, you got to check this out. And it was a link to a website. And this was basically what I would say was like a Bible of flat Earth. Like, it had everything, like all the YouTube videos compiled, the important data pulled out, organized, table of contents, like it was legit. And at the end of that, one specific like website that was explaining flat Earth was like their summary, their conclusion was that God created this. So it wasn't like, I'm not telling you that every flat earther is like gonna find God through flat Earth, but that's how it worked for me. And also, just want to add a disclaimer: I am not a flat earther. I'm not a flat earther, but that was part of my journey.
And so, okay, and then God, so flat Earth, then you kind of had a relationship with God, and that's not really like the Christian understanding of God, is it?
No,
Um,
for me at that time, so this was like, honestly, like, again, not to be like poetic or like sappy or anything, but this was like a beautiful time in my life. What really like resonated with me was more like the Hindu style of spirituality. Like, I know Hindus, they got like a bunch of different gods, but kind of the idea of like the ultimate self that gives life to all the other selves, and the idea of reincarnation. I started really looking into this more, and the beauty of it was I had this feeling of like, the term for it is a spiritual awakening. And it was like I was being reminded of something I had forgotten long ago. It wasn't like I was reading and learning anything new. It was just reading it and I was like, oh yeah, like I know that. That makes sense. That's how that that checks out to me. Like that resonates with my spirit, with my soul. And yeah, it was a great, great time in my life. So I just gravitated towards that one, towards like more of an Eastern tradition.
are you more of a loving person since that spiritual awakening? Do you have more ease in your life? Do you find it easier to
Sure.
like feel love for people and compassion?
It's something that like is a practice though. It's not something that you just learn about and like you're good. Because honestly, like since that time in my life, I've been on a spiritual path. I've strayed from the path, and I definitely notice differences from when like, if I'm listening to some nice affirmations when I'm going to sleep, like, or if I'm just listening to like some comedy podcast. After a few weeks, I notice a difference. I do. And definitely when I'm on the spiritual path, definitely a lot more understanding, forgiving, patient, all of those virtues.
Um, yeah, it's interesting it's great to have these conversations with other people about like spirituality. Even though we can't define what spirituality is, it's interesting here other
We
people's
know. We
perspectives
know.
and what their experience. It's something. Yes, you also last time we spoke, Sev, you also spoke about like ayahuasca. That's something I'm interested in. I met quite a few people who did it traveling when I was backpacking, and some people had some like really transformative things to say about it. How was your experience?
Experience was intense. I think that's probably
Yeah.
the first word you should use when you describe what the ayahuasca experience is like. Um, I would definitely say transformative, but maybe not in the way some others might say it. Like for me, it's more of like a slow understanding, a slow revelation of what I experienced during the trip. It's not something that the next day, even though for sure, like the next week, man, you're looking at leaves and you're like, man, you see the leaves on the trees, you say hello to them, you just have this feeling that everything is alive with spirit. For the sake of conversation, it's not like the next day my life was different and I understood everything that I just saw. Right? It's still something. It'll be a year in May. It's still something that I'm uncovering as I go. Like, I wrote a journal each time. So I did a 3-day ceremony, which consisted of two ceremonies. A 3-day retreat, 2 ceremonies. And after each ceremony, I wrote in my notebook everything that I could remember. And I still look back at that and I read it again and I can kind of, something that I didn't fully understand before might apply to something I'm going through now. It's like when I was reading this 6 months ago, I had no idea the situation I would be in 6 months from then. But now this makes sense. This is like a situation in my life now. So it's something that I think you can always go back and find some more wisdom, find something else in there. It's man, it's something else. It's something else.
And did it bring you closer to God, or was you perceive God to be?
So my opinion of what it brought me closer to is God-like. But this was like a definitely some sort of divine spirit, like the mother spirit of ayahuasca is who I encountered on my second journey. And I don't know if I would call her God, but she exists in that upper echelon of spiritual beings for sure. And she definitely has a place in this world. Absolutely.
Everyone that Why does everyone that does ayahuasca, why do they all describe it as like mother ayahuasca? Like, why is that? Why did you get that depiction from the experience?
It's just something that
Everyone
you
says the same thing.
I think there's two ways to look at this. Does everybody see and feel this mother spirit because everybody talk about it? Or is everybody talking about it because that's what they experience? Like, I don't know. Like, I had known about ayahuasca and I've heard a lot of different experiences throughout my life before I took my journey. So maybe what they told me was imprinted upon me, so that's what manifested itself to me. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like that for me. Like, it was just like, I saw her and I knew that was it. That was it. I just was full of knowing, like, this is an entity, this is the mother, and this is the spirit of ayahuasca itself. Like, this is the manifestation of this medicine, of this wizardry, whatever you want to call it. This lives in that spirit. The spirit lives in.
And you also, last time we spoke, you also said that you came away with the feeling that like nothing matters. And I know that's a big impermanence is a big, it's one of the pillars of Buddhism and Stoicism as well, is like you will die. Um, and you just had that like deep realization after it that like nothing does matter. In the context that you kind of accept what happens. Do you still have that like that feeling or that memory of how that felt? Was that something you?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And last time I mentioned that I know that can sound nihilistic, right? Like, oh, nothing we
Yeah.
do matters. So, like, you can either go be a dirtbag, you can be a saint. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Like, when I say I came to that realization, you also kind of have to understand, like, the scaffolding, the spiritual scaffolding that I had leading up to that, right? Like, my saying that nothing matters also takes into consideration that I believe in some sort of reincarnation or karmic system, right? So it's like nothing matters because you get a chance to do it again, right? Like if I was just somebody that believed once you die, the lights are out and that's it. You no longer exist. There is no awareness. There's no eternal darkness. There's no heaven. There's no hell. Maybe I would feel differently. And I wouldn't say that nothing matters. But because of my beliefs that I've built on, I I can sit here and say that like nothing really matters, and there's beauty in that. There's beauty in that.
Yeah, 100%. I've done a few meditations that focus on impermanence, and it's just like you meditate on the fact that everything is transient and like everything passes. Um, and it's kind of something you can intellectually understand, but a few of these meditations kind of guide you through it, and it does give you that kind of like awareness of it. No, it's really, it gives you kind of a feeling of peace that like everything's just passing, and you can't control too much, and your mind thinks and your ego thinks, and it is kind of that like kind of that loosening of your identity with yourself, with your ego.
Yeah. And we touched a little bit upon like Hindu or like Buddhist beliefs, and what is it that like one of the first things in Buddhism is like that desire is suffering, right? Suffering comes from
Yeah.
desire. And I think one of the deeper meanings of that is like that like clinging that we have to life, right? Like this is it. This is all we're gonna have. It's so impermanent, transient. Like we try to cling on to things, and that act of clinging, like people loosen up. You look tense. Like why do we say things like that? It's like because we're just so tight, like trying to hold on to life itself, and it's a futile pursuit. Like you can't do it.
What do you think of Christianity? Do you think there's any like wisdom or spirituality, or do you think it's kind of dogmatic or?
And I suppose you could say both about just about any religion or a lot of spiritual practices, like being both
Yeah.
dogmatic and what was the other word you said?
Did I think Christianity was dogmatic, or did I think it was is there any like spiritual virtue in there, or is there wisdom in there, or is it like you obviously I know you hold like Hinduism in high regard and Buddhism, but I was wondering, do you think there's virtue in Christianity or?
Oh man, I mean, I have so many layers to this question. Like, I suppose as it stands today, like you can almost look at Christianity as two separate religions living under one roof. You have like the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, they're both very different. So, New Testament being basically the life of Jesus. I mean, I don't think you can argue with a lot of Jesus's teachings. You know, there's definitely a lot of value spiritually to the New Testament and specifically the teachings of Jesus. Um, I think there's something to it for sure. But again, like in the modern day, you're going to find people who practice Christianity because of that spiritual nature to the religion. But then you also will have like some like extremists, I guess you could say, that or just do it like maybe they believe in it, they grew up believing in it, so now they're just doing things so they don't go to hell, which I don't think is the purpose of Christianity is to be good so you don't go to hell. Like I don't think that's what they were getting.
I actually read a book recently. It's by Eckhart Tolle. It's called The New Earth, and one of the key what he argues in the book is that Jesus was like an enlightened being, similar to the Buddha, and he was like preaching enlightenment, and but essentially that Christianity kind of got taken over by dogma, and he like has lots of quotes from Jesus and how it shows that it refers to like transcendence and like enlightenment. But he argues that Christianity then is kind of there's a lot of dogma in it, so
Yeah, and
somewhat
I
similar to
think
what
the
you're saying.
way for sure, and I think the way that we understand and interpret things now is drastically different from the way that they did even hundreds of years ago. You know, you look at like Renaissance paintings and stuff from like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, whatever eras they were painting. I'm not a big art history guy, but even going as far back as the Bible, like the symbology that's thrown into these stories is something that we're not really trained to comprehend anymore. I think like symbolism was a lot more prominent back then, and that's really how they understood things. So when you look at like
Mhm.
maybe the creation stories in the Bible or like some of the miracles that Jesus performed, I don't know if they are like literal stories. I think there are a lot of like metaphors with a lot of symbolism in there, and we're just not able to fully understand what they were trying to tell us.
When I was traveling in Guatemala, it's I went to Lake Atitlan, and it's like very spiritual, and a lot of people do like yoga, and like there's retreat centers for ayahuasca. And I went to like a static dance thing. It's like this kind of like alternative like yoga dance, and everyone like does like slow dance moves, and some people just do like yoga stretches. And I kind of went to it with an open mind. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go, and even if I feel like a bit uncomfortable or out of my place, or yeah, out of place, I was like, I'm just gonna, who cares? Like, I literally know nobody here except for people I met in the hostel. And I did it for like I was doing it for like an hour, like dance moves, and I just kind of felt like actually I was like, even though I tried so hard, I was like, it was kind of uncomfortable and cringy, and I felt like if you weren't alternative, or if you weren't like if you didn't have long hair or dreadlocks or tattoos of mushrooms, you didn't really fit in. And I kind of thought that was like kind of hypocritical of that community. That it's almost like they have their own cool groups and stuff. It's almost like this kind of hippie alternative spiritual crowd has it has its like toxic elements to it almost.
Absolutely, especially for, a group that essentially their platform is like love, is just like
Yeah.
putting out as much love as possible. They definitely can be a bit exclusionary at points. I mean, personally, I'll say that I've never experienced that firsthand, and I hope that doesn't
Yes.
mean that I've been on the other side of it and been like one of the people that was kind of too cool. I don't think so. But I've never personally experienced that, but I've definitely seen it. I've never been the one excluded from the group. I think because you took a chance. You didn't really know what you were getting into when you did that. I think for me, I could kind of like see. I had the opportunity to kind of see those things before getting into it, so I was like, this group isn't for me. And I've been lucky to where the situations that I did just throw myself into were always very like welcoming, loving situations. So I did a couple like spiritual retreats when I was like kind of newly sober. And, coming from the life of a drug addict to go into this intimate retreat, like a lot of hugging and a lot of meditating and a lot of like lovey dovey emotional talk, man, night and day from what I was used to before that. Well, again, luckily, like it was a very welcoming place.
And with that like spiritual retreat center, how did you find like everyone being so open to each other from day one? Like, do you think that's because what do you think? Do you think that's like healthy, or I suppose different than retreat centers?
So
People are there for a reason.
yeah, it is different, and it definitely creates this like environment of warmth and welcome. Like again, as long as everybody is participating, right? If everybody is
Hmm.
participating in that, I think it's really nice. Like you feel a part of something. It definitely has this energy that everybody syncs up to, and like you feel like a part of some spiritual family or something. Well, what's interesting is, having done a couple of these retreats and like talked to some people that work in this field and stuff like that, like it can't be sustainable. Because I always find like, you get some gossip on like the retreat leaders and stuff like that, and this one was sleeping with this one, and then all of a sudden now he's dating. Like there's always, I don't know, things always kind of, it's entropy, right? It's like the natural direction is decay, right? Things naturally just decay. So I think it's great initially. It's great for a weekend retreat to exist in a space like that. But I
Mm.
don't think it's something that you can do sustainably. Like, again, unless everybody is participating, then maybe you can do it. But it only takes one person to be like, oh, these people are being open. There's a weakness. And then they get in there and it just, drives a stake through the whole thing.
Yeah, it's very true, and it does depend on the group you get. You could go to a retreat center and get a generally nice group of people and say, "Oh, it's brilliant," or you could have different. I know it obviously varies on the groups, but the group that you get, the groups that you do get. But yeah, I did a yoga retreat in Guatemala, and it was very like huggy, and we had to sing before meals and stuff, and I did really enjoy it, and there's some really nice people there, but after like 4 or 5 days, like people were kind of gossiping about each other, and you're still doing all this stuff, and it kind of you kind of realize like it is a bit like I felt it was a bit fake, um, and like at the end of it, then like when people were like getting together, and I was like so clicky and not so clicky, but I just reflecting on it, I can see why you do it, and I do agree with you about like it changes like the energy when everyone is like very open and everyone's having like conversations like this all day, but yeah, it's just something I reflected on that it was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's like for me, it's definitely very therapeutic. Like if you get yourself into the experience, if it's like a weekend retreat, it can be very therapeutic. You feel vulnerable, you allow yourself to share some things maybe you've been holding on to. But I don't think it's a good idea to live in that space. Like I think it's a good short-term therapeutic experience, but like it could be dangerous. You don't want to be super vulnerable all the time, emotionally or physically. It's don't want to put yourself in the position to be hurt all the time.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of the
I think it's kind of unfair to expect everybody to do that, because one of the things that I worked on at these retreats was like, I'd be sitting there, somebody would share something, an experience, or they would give feedback to another participant, and I'm just like, this guy is full of shit. Like, I don't know if anybody in the room is buying it, but I'm not buying what you're selling, buddy. Like, what did you just read a book on the way over here? I'm in here like tearing people apart because I think they're fake. And then they call on me, and after having these thoughts of like everybody's full of shit, then I go on and I'm like, well, yeah, it's actually really appreciate the way that you were able to open up to all, and then I do the same thing. So it's like it's kind of unfair to ask everybody to be completely like open and just judgment free all the time. I don't think it's in our nature.
Yeah, it's very hard not to judge.
Sure, for sure. And I think for
Yeah.
me, like one of the important things is like one of the things that I learned is that I'm not really responsible for my first thought, right? And if my first thought is a judgment on somebody else, then it's up to me to be like, well, you know what? Maybe they're having a hard time. Maybe they're going through something. That's going to be me one day. You know, it's just I'm responsible for my reaction and my response to that first thought. But there's nothing I can do about the first one. Anybody that's tried to meditate once in their life knows that that first thought they are not in control of.
Yeah, 1,000,000% true. So, do you practice meditation usually?
Honestly, not as much as I kind of wish I did. I mean, while I was on that spiritual path, I definitely made a good effort to practice meditation. Like, I would always, I mentioned I hated doing the construction job, so I would try to get to the job site at least like 20 minutes early. I would sit in my car, I'd turn the radio off, and I would put on like a guided meditation or something. Try and center myself to get through the next 8 to 10 hours of work. And mixed results with meditation. So I've never felt pressure to like make it a part of my daily routine because I honestly for me like I didn't really achieve the results that I had hoped for. Maybe I didn't stick with it long enough. So currently no, I'm not actively practicing meditation. There are other ways to meditate. I mean, a synonym for meditation in the spiritual world is contemplation, right? If you give yourself time to reflect inward, I think that's a form of meditation in itself. And I definitely give myself that.
If you met 18-year-old Sev, what would you say to him? In a few 20 seconds.
I'd tell him to change his behavior. I'd be like, stop doing drugs all the time. Like, it's a waste of time. But man, that's tough. Like some wisdom to impart on young me. And this is a cliche answer, and given everything I know, I hate to give it, but I would tell him to stay in school. Stay in school for as long as you can. And it's not the school part of it. It's just like give yourself as much time as possible until you have to live like an adult. Because you're going to get wiser and you're going to know yourself better in that amount of time. So you'll have a better idea of we work for most of our lives. Most of our lives are spent at our job. Like, you want to have a good idea of what you want to do before you join the workforce. In school, sure, get the education, learn, broaden your horizons, but just give yourself as much time as you can until you have to, live in the real world.
Very wise answer, Sev. And I'd expect, nonetheless. Thanks a million for coming on to the podcast today, Sev. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. You're looking great for 33. I'll also I wanted to get that in.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, thanks a million, Sev. It was a great podcast. It was great chatting to you. And we'll definitely do it again sometime.